The reading of the will. As the will was being read, my son John and his wife Jessica were already celebrating their victory. Jessica pulled me aside and warned me with disgust. Robert Miller, start packing your things. I am giving you 24 hours to get out of here. John would not even look me in the eye. But suddenly Arthur Davis, the notary, stopped him in his tracks. Excuse me, I missed reading the last line. Your mother did not leave the house to either of you. She left a video recording. Look at the screen. Now your son will know that we all know everything about him. Mary Ellen's funeral. The house smelled of burning sage and wilted marigolds. A heavy, almost sacred scent that seemed to stick to my clothes like a curse. I walked past the living room window, watching the gray clouds covering our neighborhood in Oakwood. The mirrors scattered around the room reflected nothing useful, but I already knew I looked like a ghost. At my own wife's funeral, I was not the master of the house. I was an accessory, an old piece of furniture they had forgotten to dust before the important guests arrived. John Miller, my son, stood planted in the center of the living room. He wore an impeccable black suit, and that expression he had perfected during his years on the city council, afflicted but full of restrained dignity. Around him were people, elected officials, real estate developers, powerful men I had never seen in our house when Mary Ellen was alive. They squeezed his shoulder, nodded, and spoke of an irreplaceable loss. No one approached me. To them, I was just an old man in a black suit, a widower whose time had ended with the last breath of his wife. I took refuge in the shadow of the heavy curtains when I heard the clicking of high heels. Jessica Miller, my daughter-in-law, crossed the room like a black crow, drawing everyone's attention. She wore a black dress that was far too revealing for a funeral, but perfect for the social columns. She took John's arm and leaned into his ear. Their voices were low, but my hearing, sharpened by 40 years of working in the courthouses and the silence of judicial archives, caught every word. "When can we start the remodeling?" she asked without even looking in my direction. "This house is a tomb, and that office where your father keeps all those files is a nightmare for fire safety codes." John sighed as if fighting a migraine and checked the time on his expensive watch. "Patience, Jessica. The reading of the will is tomorrow. After that, the movers can come that very night. We are tearing down that office first. I need room for a pool table." Something tightened in my throat, cold and dark. My office, my war room, as Mary Ellen used to joke. In those perfectly organized wooden filing cabinets lay the history not just of our family, but of half the city. For 40 years, I had been an assistant clerk for the civil court. I knew every sub-paragraph of the federal civil code, every comma of the procedural rules. Judges came and went, lawyers rotated, but I stayed. I was the one who made sure their files were flawless, pointing out errors in dates and phrasing. They thought I was just an old bureaucrat, a paper pusher. But my meticulousness had saved their careers from ridicule before the appellate courts, and now my son, my own flesh and blood, wanted to tear all that down to put in a pool table. I did not make a sound. I had learned to be invisible. In the courthouses, emotion is a weakness. Only facts carry weight. The notary's office. The next day we sat in the office of Arthur Davis, the notary and Mary Ellen's old friend. The office smelled of old paper and cigar tobacco, a smell that had always calmed me. Arthur, a heavy-set man with gray hair, sat behind a solid mahogany desk, arranging documents. He avoided my gaze, and that unsettled me more than Jessica's open hostility. John leaned back in his chair, looking like he owned the place, one leg crossed over his knee. Jessica sat on the edge of her seat, ready to pounce. "Let us skip the formalities, Arthur." John sighed, staring at the ceiling. "I have a city council meeting at 3 o'clock. The notary took off his glasses, cleaned them with an old handkerchief, and put them back on. "The procedure is the procedure, John Miller." He began reading the basic clauses, dry legal jargon that sounded like music to my ears. Bank account, liquid assets, the car, everything went to the son. I straightened up in my chair, which creaked against my back. I did not expect an inheritance. Mary Ellen had always said John needed to keep up appearances, and that I needed very little. And also the primary residence and the land located at 4 Elm Street. She dove into her oversized purse, and with a sharp squeal that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room, she pulled out a small glass of bubbling champagne. The golden liquid poured into the glass. "Finally!" she exclaimed without any shame. She turned to me, and her eyes held not just triumph, but pure contempt. She leaned in and hissed so only I could hear. "Start packing your things, Robert. I am giving you 24 hours to get out. No boxes, just personal items. The rest goes to the trash." John did not even look up, busy sending text messages, mentally already spending his inheritance. I remained silent. Inside, not a single tear, just a cold clarity. According to Article 62 of the Federal Housing Law, even a registered occupant whose property title has changed has at least 30 days, barring a court order. She was bluffing, but she did not know who she was dealing with. "Excuse me." Arthur's voice was surprisingly firm, cutting through the clinking of the champagne glass. "I have not finished reading the last line." Jessica froze. The glass stopped in mid-air. John looked up from his phone. "What line?" he asked, irritated. "Mom always left everything to me. It is tradition." "Your mother, Mary Ellen." The notary looked directly at me. His gaze was full of deep respect, and I think sympathy. "Did not leave the house to either of you. She left a provision and a video recording." Arthur pressed a button on the remote control. A white screen descended from the wall, and the projector turned on. Mary Ellen's face appeared. She was sitting in her favorite armchair, the one John wanted to throw away. She looked tired. The illness had clearly taken its toll, but her eyes were clear and hard. "John," my wife's voice filled the room, making Jessica jump. "Did you think I was blind? Did you really believe I did not see where the money for your office came from, and why funds were disappearing from the municipal budget?" The room got so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking. John turned pale. "This is crazy." "I leave the final decision entirely to my husband, Robert," Mary Ellen continued from the screen. "He is the only person who knows the combination to the safe. But more importantly, John, he is the only person who knows how to read what is inside. I am not leaving him a house. I am leaving him a file, and the right to decide what to do with it." The image changed. An electronic scan of a document appeared. A blueprint of our property stamped in red with a demolition permit. John jumped out of his seat. "This is a fake. Turn that off right now." I did not look at my son. My gaze, trained to spot the slightest inconsistency in thousands of documents, remained fixed on the screen. I saw the date on the blueprint, 3 months ago. The signature was John's. He had planned the demolition while his mother was still alive. But it was not the date that made my heart beat a little faster, and then calm down into a cold, steady rhythm. It was the seal, the embossed circular seal validating the permit. It bore the inscription, Westville County Urban Planning Commission. I felt the corners of my mouth lift into a smile. Westville County had been administratively dissolved and annexed by the Central District 2 years ago. That seal was expired. The document was legally null and void. My son, the great politician, was not just cruel, he was stupid. And in my world, stupidity is a death sentence. A professional anger, cold and pure, began to rise in me, pushing aside the grief. I realized the battle was just beginning. "It is a deep fake," John yelled. His voice cracked into a high pitch, shattering the image of the composed politician he had cultivated for years. "Arthur, you are an accomplice to this. It is a cheap forgery. My mother was out of her mind in her final days, heavily medicated on morphine." He paced the room, grabbing the back of a chair, the edge of the table, as if the floor were crumbling beneath his feet. Jessica stood frozen, her face flushed red. The champagne glass in her hand looked ridiculous, like a toy brought to a funeral. I remained seated without moving. A shift had occurred inside me. silent as a key turning in a well-oiled lock. My son was not only cruel, he was legally illiterate. He had signed a document with the seal of a non-existent authority. He had planned to destroy evidence without even verifying its legal validity. For 40 years I had seen men like him. They think power is a shield, forgetting that the law is a sword, and that sword was now in my hand. I stood up slowly. The floor barely creaked. I knew how to stand up silently so as not to interrupt a jury during the reading of a verdict. A heavy silence fell over the office. John stopped mid-sentence, turning to face me. I did not see fear in his eyes, but confusion. The helpless old man seemed to drift away from me. The combination to the safe. My voice was even, firm. It was not the voice of a father. It was the voice of the court clerk, returning a petition for lack of jurisdiction. You do not need the combination, John. He stopped, trying to compose himself. Dad, do not start. Give me the combination, and we can... You do not need the combination, I repeated, taking a step toward him. You need a search warrant, and you have no grounds to get one. I turned to the notary, who was watching me with a slight smile. Arthur Davis, I request that you officially record that I fully accept the duties of executor and administrator of my late wife's estate, including the management of the archives. Send a copy of the record to my email within the hour. Without waiting for an answer, I walked out of the office. I did not slam the door. I closed it softly with a decisive click. But my mind was clear, cutting away all unnecessary emotion. Back at the property, I did not bother taking off my coat. I walked past the living room where Jessica's perfume still lingered and went straight to the heavy wooden door of my office at the end of the hallway. I turned the knob. The air inside was stale and smelled of old paper, typewriter oil, and ink, the smell of order. Lining the walls were rows of cardboard filing cabinets and locked shelves. Here, in these yellowing paper boxes, was the chronicle of the city's life. Land disputes from the 90s, illegal privatizations from the 2000s, minutes from the Urban Development Commission. Mary Ellen gathered the intelligence. I systematized it. She was the hunter. I was the guardian. I sat down at my massive old desk and turned on the computer. The screen lit up, bathing the room in a bluish glow. John thought I was an obsolete relic, technologically illiterate. He had forgotten that I was the one who implemented the electronic document management system at the courthouse, while he was still failing his exams. My fingers settled into their usual place on the keyboard. I logged into the electronic justice portal. My read-only access was still active. Judges often asked me for help pulling complex case files. Now I was not just locking the doors of the house. I was creating a legal fortress around it. I clicked on the template for an emergency injunction request. My fingers flew across the keys. Applicant, Robert Miller in the capacity of executor. Objective, prohibition of all eviction actions concerning the property. Reason, threat of loss of inherited real estate. I cited the relevant article of the Civil Code. I attached the scan of the will that Arthur had already sent me, and I added a point about the questionable legal status of the demolition permit. I clicked sign with electronic signature, my sword in the digital world. The system hesitated for a second. Then it displayed a green notification. Request registered, case number assigned. That was it. In 15 minutes, that number would appear in the database of the Registrar of Deeds. Any attempt to sell, mortgage, or destroy the house would be automatically blocked. If John showed up with a bulldozer, he would not just be violating my wishes, he would be violating a court order. It was not a family scandal, it was a criminal offense. I took a breath and leaned back in my chair, my hands resting on the desk, my head steady. I felt a strange calm, as if I had returned to work after a long vacation. Now the safe was hidden behind a fake panel in one of the filing cabinets. Mary Ellen did not trust electronics for these things, a good old-fashioned mechanical lock. I dialed the combination. the date of our wedding, and the article number with which we won our first case together. Click. The heavy door swung open. Inside was a single black cardboard folder, unlabeled. I pulled it out, feeling the weight of the paper. I opened the folder. The first item was a contract, thick watermarked paper, an agreement for the sale of the land and structures. Buyer, Apex Chemical Industries. Seller, John Miller, with power of attorney. I turned the page, skimming the standard clauses, looking for the trap. John wanted to sell the land for a factory. I already knew that. But why had Mary Ellen said John was setting a trap for me? Then I saw it. Addendum number 3 to the contract. Assignment of liability and operational agreement. I stared at the black cardboard. The cold I had felt in the notary's office felt like a light shiver compared to the glacial horror that washed over me now. According to this clause, after the sale, the title transferred to the company. But the user and the party responsible for the condition of the land and the groundwater during the pre-construction period was designated as the current occupant. Me. John was not just selling the house. He was selling the property as a toxic dump site. But the most terrifying part was elsewhere. The contract stipulated that all environmental fines, remediation costs, and cleanup expenses for zoned lands fell entirely on the responsible occupant. He knew the company planned to dump here even before the official construction, and he had structured the contract so that when the environmental agency or the prosecutor arrived and found toxins, the criminal charges would not be filed against the chemical giant or against him, the one who took the money. They would be filed against me. The folder contained another document, Project Epicenter, a hydrogeological map of the land. Red arrows indicated that the runoff from the future factory would flow directly into the municipal river, poisoning the city's water supply. My son did not just want to dispossess me, he planned to turn me into the scapegoat for an environmental catastrophe just to close his deal. He was willing to send his own father to federal prison just to buy a seat in Congress. I closed the folder. The sound of the cover snapping shut was like a gunshot. I rested my palm on the cardboard. I was no longer a father. I was a prosecutor. And a prosecutor has no family feelings. A prosecutor only has evidence. The first confrontation, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, broke my trance. The gravel crunched aggressively under the tires. That is how people drive when they think the ground beneath their feet belongs to them. I looked out the window and watched through the sheer curtains. John's black SUV, followed by a dented sedan with a sticker that read, 24-hour locksmith, and another car, a gold sedan I did not recognize, arrived earlier than expected. John Jessica, a young man with a toolbox, and a tall man in a red suit with an open leather briefcase tucked under his arm. An expert, I realized. A lawyer. John hoped to intimidate me with terms I knew better than the multiplication tables. I did not go down. I stayed in my office, looking out the window like a general on a hill. They approached the door. John yelled something at the locksmith, pointing at the door. The man nodded. He stepped up and took out his tools. Jessica was ready, tapping her foot impatiently on the old tiles. But then the locksmith froze. He backed away slowly and pointed to the sheet of paper I had taped to the door 20 minutes earlier. An official format document, placed in a plastic sleeve to protect it from the dampness. John ripped off the sleeve and brought the paper close to his eyes. I saw his neck tense. He shoved the document under the nose of the man in the red suit. The man examined the text, and I watched his expression shift from arrogant to worried, almost scared. He said something to John, shaking his head. John yelled, gesturing furiously, but the lawyer backed away, as if he were afraid to touch the door. I knew what the paper said. It was a copy of the court notification with the electronic acceptance stamp, a preventative injunction on the property, the case number, the subject of the probate proceeding, and a small postscript I had added citing the penal code article on trespassing and violating a court order. The locksmith, overhearing snippets of the conversation, packed his tools back into his case, said something like, I'm not getting involved in this mess, and walked back to his van. Jessica called after him, but he did not look back. John stood planted on the porch, gripping my piece of paper, then glared directly up at my office window. Our eyes met. Even though he could not see me behind the curtains, he knew I was there. A minute later, my cell phone rang. "Open up, Dad. We need to talk." I went downstairs and opened the door, but I did not step outside, blocking the entrance with my body. "You're not coming into the house," I said calmly. "Pursuant to the court order, access to third parties is restricted until the inventory is completed." "Throw this old man out," Jessica huffed indignantly. "I am your son's wife, legally under the framework of the probate process." "You're a third party with no rights to the disputed asset," I said calmly. "And you, John, are an interested party." The man in the red suit coughed discreetly. "John Miller, your father is formally correct. If we force entry now, it will be considered a violation of the court order. It is a crime at the very least, given his status." John gritted his teeth, gesturing for Jessica and the lawyer to go back to the car. "Dad!" He changed his tone. Now the warm notes he used to charm voters at rallies returned to his voice. He stepped closer, trying to take my hand. I did not pull it away, but my palm remained cold and lifeless. "Listen," he began. "I understand you are upset. Mom just died. You are grieving." "Article 89 of the General Law of Ecological Equilibrium," I interrupted him. "Any real estate transaction in a protected water zone requires certification from the Conservancy. Without verification from the land registry, any business involving a property in a protected water zone is null and void, and our parcels located precisely in such a zone." The smile vanished from his face. "You are blackmailing me," he yelled. "I already took the money. Do you understand? The advance was spent. I have to close the deal this week. If not, the investors, they are not people you play games with." "And I am?" I asked softly. John stepped back as if I had slapped him. Something new flashed in his eyes. Not shame, but fear. The real, raw fear of a cornered animal. He realized I was not just obstructing. I knew. "You're going to regret this," he spat, backing away. "Do you think your books are going to save you? I have resources you have never even heard of. We are going to cut everything off. Electricity, water, gas. You will come crawling back." He marched back to the car. Jessica was already inside, typing furiously on her phone. The lawyer in the red suit stepped aside to open John's door. And at that moment, as he turned, his jacket fell open and I saw his professional badge. My professional memory, which had retained thousands of case numbers and names, clicked, yielding the result. I had seen that number in case summaries years ago. The housing fraud case for veterans. A disbarred lawyer, convicted of forging powers of attorney. "John!" I called out. He turned, already holding the car door. "What now?" "Your lawyer," I pointed at the man in the red suit. "Tell him that if he shows up at my door one more time, I will send the State Bar Association a request for information regarding his status, and a copy of his conviction record from 5 years ago. I doubt his parole is over." The man in red froze. He slowly turned his head toward me, and his face turned the color of the asphalt he was standing on. He muttered something quickly to John and got into the car. John glared at me with pure rage, but said nothing. The door slammed shut. The engine roared, and the convoy took off, kicking up a cloud of dust. I stood on the porch. My small victory tasted bittersweet. John was desperate. He was using a disbarred scam artist because no honest lawyer would touch such a dirty case. That meant all the documents that man had prepared were legally vulnerable. My son was not just desperate. He was panicking, and panic makes you make mistakes. All I had to do was wait and record them. The night attack. I went back inside the house and locked all the deadbolts. But I knew now that he would return, and next time he would not come with paperwork. John had mentioned investors, the kind you do not play games with. I went back to my office. I needed to know more. What was Apex Chemical Industries? Who was behind them, and why were they in such a hurry? I sat down in front of the computer. My workday was just beginning. The cursor blinked in the empty search bar like a heartbeat. I did not type the company's name into an ordinary search engine. There, I would only find a pretty website with pictures of happy employees and green fields. I needed the truth, and the truth does not hide in advertisements. It hides in the judicial archives. I opened my legal database, and I entered Apex Chemical Industries in the search bar. The system pondered for a moment, scanning case files. Result: 319 documents found. I clicked on the filter. Civil matters. The list was endless. Lawsuits for health damages, environmental violations, a class action lawsuit from the residents of the town of Springfield. But almost everywhere the note indicated proceeding terminated by settlement, or case closed, documents sealed at the request of the defense, commercial confidentiality. They had bought their way out, paying off victims, bribing officials, and continuing to poison the earth. But I knew a loophole. Administrative matters, unlike civil ones, remain in the public domain longer and are harder to erase from the database, especially if you know the initial protocol number. I started digging deeper, using date and region filters. 1 hour, 2 hours. My eyes were growing tired, my leg ached, but I did not stop. Finally, I found an administrative court ruling from 5 years ago. A small fine for violating zoning and dumping regulations. In the appendix was a list of chemicals: mercury, cadmium, phenol. I cross-referenced this list with the map of Project Epicenter from Mary Ellen's safe. Everything matched. They were not just building a factory. They were looking for a cheap place to hide what could not be treated. And our property, with its old underground quarries, was perfect for burying the poison deep within the subsoil. Except those quarries were connected to the municipal water table. If John sold the house, in a year-half the city would be drinking water that tasted like phenol, and according to the documents, I would be the person to blame. Suddenly the computer screen went black. The hum of the tower ceased. The desk lamp flickered and died. Darkness and silence enveloped the house, broken only by the sound of rain on the roof. I flipped the switch. Nothing. I looked out the window. The neighbors' lights were on. It was not a general blackout. I took out my cell phone. A text message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. Technical issue. The crew will be out in 3 days. Or sign the papers and the power will return in 5 minutes. John. He had moved from threats to action. He thought the old man would be scared of the dark, that without electricity or heat I would surrender. He had forgotten that I had survived the 90s, when blackouts were the norm, and we drafted court rulings by candlelight. I found the flashlight in my closet. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the rows of legal codes. I went to the shelf where the old municipal bulletins were kept. File 82. City Council Resolution 40. A page yellowed by age regarding the status of buildings housing archives of national importance. Back then, my house, being city property, was a temporary repository for the municipal court records, and that status had never been officially revoked. According to Article 4, disconnecting the power supply to these buildings without the written approval of the district attorney was prohibited. I dialed the emergency line. "Hello, Municipal Services." The young woman on the other end sounded tired. "This is Robert Miller, 4 Elm Street. My power was cut. Is there an outage in the sector, or is it a targeted shutoff?" "Hold on a moment, sir. Take down this number." I cut her off with my court clerk tone, the one that made lawyers tremble. "City Council Resolution from March 12th, 1989. Your supervisor, Mr. Davis, knows that cutting power to a facility with special archive status carries up to 5 years in prison." Silence fell over the receiver. "What kind of archive?" the frustrated girl asked. "Judicial archive," I replied. "You have exactly 1 hour to restore the service. If not, in 1 hour and 1 minute, I'm calling the district attorney and dictating a criminal complaint, and I will name you as an accomplice. The timer starts now. 40 minutes later, the light bulb over the staircase flickered and came on with a yellow glow. The computer beeped, booting up. John thought he ruled the city, but the city was ruled by laws, and I knew them better than anyone. But I knew this was only a temporary victory. Unexpected salvation. I went to the kitchen to make tea. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline rush. Then a soft knock on the door. Not the aggressive pounding from earlier, but a timid, almost inaudible knock. I approached the door without opening it. "Who is it?" "Robert Miller. It is Lucy, Jessica's assistant." I frowned. The girl who was always running behind my daughter-in-law with piles of shopping bags. Her eyes perpetually red from lack of sleep and tears. Why was she here? A threat? "I'm alone," she said through the door. "Please, it is important." I opened the door, keeping the security chain latched. Lucy stood on the porch, soaked by the rain, wearing a thin coat. She was crying. In her hands, she held a small USB flash drive. "Take this." She pushed the drive through the gap. "Jessica is furious right now. She and John think you are sleeping or without power." "What is this?" I asked, taking the cold plastic. "He is forging your signature," the girl said quickly, glancing at the dark street. "Now John found an engraver. They are making a facsimile stamp. They want to submit a deed of gift, claiming you signed it a week ago, before Mary Ellen's death, to bypass your contestation." I looked at this frightened girl and saw my younger self, also naive, believing in justice, but bruised by the power of the mighty. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Lucy smiled bitterly. "Jessica fired me today. She said I bought the wrong champagne and threw a shoe at me." She smiled sadly. "I heard them talking to you this afternoon. You are the only one they are afraid of. Please make them pay." She turned and left, disappearing into the darkness. I closed the door, clutching the USB drive. Forgery of a signature. Use of a facsimile on documents transferring real estate title. This was not just fraud. It was a felony, a criminal offense, up to 10 years. I went back to the computer and plugged in the USB drive. The folder was labeled Scanned Deed. I opened the file. It was a scan of the deed of gift. The date was from a week ago. The signature looked like mine, a lot. The engraver had done a good job, but they had made a mistake. A fatal, stupid mistake that only a professional would notice. I zoomed in on the image. The color of the ink. They had used a black gel pen. But a week ago, on the day they dated the deed, I was at the hospital with Mary Ellen, and I signed the medical consent form with a strictly blue ink pen. Because in government agencies and notary offices, strict documentation must be signed in blue ink to distinguish the original from a copy. This rule is burned into my brain. I never carry a black gel pen. If I could find a copy of that medical consent with the date and time, I would have irrefutable proof that at the time of the supposed signing, I could not physically have used a black gel pen while at the hospital. But time was short. He planned to register this deed tomorrow morning as soon as the registrar's office opened, using his connections to speed it up. I had to act preemptively, and a plan began to take shape. A plan that required not only knowledge of the law, but acting skills. Tomorrow morning, I would go to them, alone, not to surrender, but to set the trap. I did not sleep that night, not from fear, but from concentration. I sat at my desk, arranging the documents in front of me like a game of solitaire. A copy of the medical consent I obtained through the hospital's electronic record system sat next to the forged deed from Lucy's USB. The difference was obvious, even to an untrained eye. But for the court, I needed more than just the ink color. I needed his panic. The morning of judgment. The morning was gray and damp. The clock struck 8. The 24 hours Jessica had given me had expired. I knew they would come, and they did not disappoint me. The sound of tires, the slamming of car doors. This time there was no locksmith and no lawyer, just John and Jessica. They barged onto the property without even trying to ring the bell. Jessica picked up a piece of stone from the driveway and threw it through the living room window. The crash of breaking glass echoed like an attack signal. "Get out, you crazy old man!" she yelled. Her face, usually smoothed with expensive creams, was twisted with rage. "Time is up. We have the documents. The house is ours." John stayed a little further back, breathing heavily. He looked haggard, his hair messy. He looked like a man on the verge of a breakdown. "Dad, do not make this harder," he said firmly. "The police are on their way. They're going to take you out of here in custody for illegal retention of private property." I walked downstairs slowly. From behind the sheer curtains, I wore the gray suit I had worn to work for the past 5 years. In my hand, I held a folder. "You are disturbing the peace," I said calmly, watching Jessica raise her arm for a second throw. "Federal Penal Code, Article 27. "I do not give a damn about your statutes," she screamed. "We just came from the registry. The deed is recorded. We have the deed of gift with your signature. You are nobody here anymore." John smiled. "A deed of gift, a deed of gift," I repeated. "The deed where my signature was made with a black gel pen?" John froze. "Like you." "And dated the 15th, I continued, not giving him time to recover. "That day, John, I was in intensive care with your mother, signing a medical consent form with a blue ink pen. Hospital cameras record 24/7. A handwriting expert will prove the forgery in 1 day, and then it is no longer a civil dispute, my son. It is a crime. Forgery of documents for the purpose of property theft." Jessica froze, her arm dropping with the stone. "But that is not all." I turned to my daughter-in-law. "Jessica, you were so excited to get this house. Did you read the contract your husband signed with Apex Chemical Industries?" "What chemicals?" She froze, confused, looking back and forth between John and me. "John did not tell you?" I feigned sincere surprise. "He sold the land for a toxic waste storage facility. But the most interesting part is the liability clause." I opened the folder and pulled out a copy of Addendum Number 3. "Read, Jessica. Clause 42. In the event of failure to recover damages from the primary responsible occupant, meaning me, secondary liability will be borne by the spouse as a beneficiary who provided notary advice for the transaction. You advised the sale, right?" Jessica snatched the paper from my hands. Her eyes scanned the lines. "What does this mean?" Her voice trembled. "It means," I explained with a cold tone, "that when the environmental agency finds phenol here and demands remediation of around $10 million, they will not just take John's office. They will take your beauty salon, your car, your clothes, and even that condo you bought in Miami. You will be bankrupt, Jessica, and you will face charges as an accomplice to an environmental crime." Jessica slowly raised her eyes toward her husband. They were filled with terror that morphed into rage. You said it was just selling the land for houses," she hissed. "You lied to me." "Jessica, wait. He is lying," John yelled, trying to grab her arm. "Lying?" I shouted. "Call your lawyer, the one with the fake degree. Ask him what secondary liability is in an environmental case." The alliance crumbled before my eyes. Jessica pushed John away. "Idiot!" she howled. "You are going to ruin us all." She turned and looked at the house. A crazy thought sparked in her eyes. "The documents. If there are no documents, there's no case." "Jessica, what are you doing?" John yelled as she ran to the car and pulled a red gasoline can out of the trunk. "We are going to burn this place down," she howled, twisting off the cap. "We will say it was an accidental fire. Insurance will cover everything, and there will be no handwriting analysis, no ink, and no signatures." "Stop!" John tried to grab her, but she splashed the gasoline directly onto the porch. The acrid smell of the fuel hit my mouth, mixing with the scent of wet earth. I stood perfectly still. Inside, everything was screaming, but I knew I could not stop them physically. I was an old man against two people threatened by fear and hatred. But I had a weapon more powerful than strength. I felt my cell phone vibrate in my pocket. It was not a signal from the police or the fire department. I calmly took out the phone, pressed a button, and brought it to my ear. "Arthur Davis," I said loudly enough for them to hear. "Activate Protocol 7. John froze. What? What protocol? Did you think I was just going to sit here waiting for you to kill me?" I turned the screen of my phone toward them. The screen showed a video feed, Departmental Notary Office, and recording in progress. Connection with Special Investigations. Detective established. "Right now," I said, looking at the camera, "they are attempting to destroy private property by dangerous means. Federal Penal Code, Article 37, arson up to 10 years, plus attempted murder, because as you know, I am in the house." Jessica, gas can in hand, froze like a pillar of salt. "But that is not all," I continued. "John, you had to speak at City Hall today, at the environmental conference, right?" "I did not just call a detective," I told him softly. "I redirected the feed. Right now, John, you are live, but not on your wife's Instagram." "Where?" he whispered. "On the big screen in the auditorium at City Hall," I replied. "The mayor, the press, and your competitors are sitting there right now. They were waiting for your lecture on a clean city, and they are watching you with a gas can while your wife holds a lighter." In the silence that settled over the yard, I heard distant, distorted voices coming from my phone. It was the noise of the crowd at the environmental conference. Jessica dropped the gas can. It fell into the puddle of gasoline. But thank God it did not ignite. The fire did not start, but something else did. The realization in my son's eyes that his career, his reputation, his life had just been turned upside down. And for that, I had not needed a single match. The collapse. John fell to his knees directly into the puddle. His expensive suit was immediately soaked, but he did not even notice. He stared at my phone where the small window showed the packed municipal hall. People in the background were standing up. Someone was filming the big screen, broadcasting our scene with their phone. The murmur of the crowd grew, turning into a storm. "Turn it off!" he screamed, reaching his trembling hands toward me. "Dad, please, turn it off. I will give everything back. The house, the land, everything. Just turn it off." Jessica stood there, her hands pressed over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She slowly backed toward the car, hoping that if she stepped out of the frame, she would disappear from reality. I did not turn off the phone. I held it with the same calm I used to hold a verdict during a trial. "Do you not understand, John?" I said, and my voice, amplified by the speakers in the municipal auditorium, rang out like a bell. "This is not a negotiation. It is a verdict." I took a step toward him. The smell of gasoline still hung in the air, mixing with the scent of his fear. "You were willing to burn down the house your mother built. You were willing to poison the city where you grew up. And for what? For money you already had more than enough of?" "I had to do it," he suddenly screamed, dissolving into hysterics. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat. "They would have killed me. The investors are not just businessmen, Dad. They are the mob. I took their money for this project. And if I do not give them the land," he sobbed, hiding his face in his hands. A desperate man, not a politician or a tycoon, but a scared little boy who got caught playing adult games. "The mob only scares those who live outside the law," I replied, "and I live by the law. And now, my son, so will you." I turned the camera toward myself, Distinguished District Attorney. I introduced myself to the invisible party on the other end of the line. "I, Robert Miller, officially report attempted arson and threat of murder. Everyone present in the auditorium is a witness. Consider this recording as official evidence, and also place in the file the documents relating to the illegal land agreement and the environmental threat, copies of which have already been sent to your office." A strict and authoritative voice came through the speaker. I recognized it. It was the district attorney himself, who I knew would be attending the meeting. "The statement is accepted. Robert Miller, the police, and an analysis team are on their way. No one is to leave the scene." John looked up. The last spark of hope died in his eyes. He realized this was the end. Not just a scandal. It was an arrest. Jessica, upon hearing about the police, screamed and ran toward the car. I had nothing to do with this, she howled, hitting the door. It was him. He forced me. I am just a wife. She jumped behind the wheel. She started the engine. The black SUV roared. Jessica, stop! John yelled, trying to reach her, but his feet slipped on the wet dirt. The car sped off, kicking up gravel. It lunged toward the gate, crushing the peony beds that Mary Ellen had loved so much. But I did not move. I knew something she did not. The car traveled about 60 feet. Then, as if it had hit an invisible wall, it braked sharply and stopped. Jessica turned the ignition, hit the steering wheel, but the engine remained silent. I walked slowly toward the immobilized car. Jessica was thrashing inside like a bird in a cage, pounding on the locked doors. Electronics, I said calmly, looking at her through the glass. Modern cars are so vulnerable. John finally got up and staggered toward me. What did you do? He asked with a hollow voice. Yesterday, I replied without looking at him. When I filed the request for a preliminary injunction, I included this car in the property inventory. It is registered in your name, John, which means it is subject to seizure until the investigation is over. I took out my second phone, Mary Ellen's old phone. I also called the insurance company. I informed them that the car was at risk of destruction and was being used to commit a crime. They have a function to disable the engines remotely by satellite. I simply asked them to activate it. John looked at me as if I were an alien. Did you calculate all of this? No, I shook my head. I just read the insurance contract. Clause 8. The insurer's right to forced engine shutdown in case of a threat of loss. You never read the fine print, my son. That is your downfall. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance. Blue and red lights pierced through the trees. Jessica in the car stopped thrashing and just sat there, covering her face with her hands. John collapsed. Why, Dad? He asked softly. You could have given us the house. We would have given you money. You could have lived comfortably. Why did you destroy us? I looked at him. There was no triumph in my eyes, only exhaustion and a deep, ancestral sadness. I did not destroy you, John. I saved you from yourself, from what you have become. The money, the power, they devoured your soul. Perhaps where you are going, you will have time to reflect and remember that you are the son of Mary Ellen and Robert Miller, people who served the law, not sold it. The police cars entered the yard. Uniformed men fanned out. I saw a familiar face, Captain Anderson, the precinct commander. 20 years ago, I had taught him, when he was a young officer, how to properly write a crime scene report. He approached me, taking off his hat. Robert Miller! He nodded respectfully with a trace of embarrassment. We received the signal. Everything is recorded. I handed him the phone with the recording. Attempted arson. Threats. Physical evidence, the gas can and the lighter in her pocket. Proceed with the arrest according to all regulations. And kindly, I nodded toward John. Read him his Miranda rights clearly and distinctly, so there are no procedural complaints later. Anderson nodded and turned to his men. Attempted arson, secure the scene, take statements. I walked past the old apple tree. I saw the handcuffs close around my son's wrists. I saw a tearful Jessica being pulled from the car. But this was still not over. There was one final move, the most devastating one, the one that would destroy not just his freedom, but the foundation of his greed, the final blow. The district attorney's investigator, a young man with glasses, approached me. Robert Miller, we need to seize the documents related to the property for the file. Of course, I said, but there is a change. I opened my folder and pulled out an old sheet of parchment. It was not a copy. It was the original. What is this? The investigator asked. This young man, I said, unfolding the paper, is the land grant deed from 1898, the original document for the land on which this house sits. My great-grandfather bought this land from the city council. John, being led toward the police car, heard this and turned around. What difference does that make? He yelled. The land is still mine according to the will. No, John, I said. It is not yours or mine. I pointed to a line written in faded but still legible ink. There are conditions here. What is called a reversionary interest. The land was transferred to private ownership on the condition that it be used exclusively for residence, gardening, and the public good. In the event of industrial use or any other commercial use that affects the public, the property title is automatically voided, and the land reverts to the city without compensation. I looked at my son. By signing the contract with Apex Chemical Industries, John, you officially confirmed the intention to use the land for industrial purposes. You triggered this clause with your own hands. From the moment you signed that contract, this land no longer belongs to the Miller family. It belongs to the city. John turned pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. You sold something that was no longer yours, my son, I concluded. Not only are you a fraud, you are bankrupt. And Apex Chemical Industries will now have to sue the municipality, which will gladly take back this parcel for a public park to cover up the scandal. John was pushed into the car. The door slammed shut, cutting him off from me, from the house, from the past. I stayed in the yard. The rain had stopped, the clouds parted, and a pale ray of sunlight appeared. I breathed in the air. It smelled of wet earth, apples, and freedom. A cold, heavy freedom, but freedom nonetheless. The window of the police car rolled down, and John's twisted face leaned out. "This is a deep fake," he howled, his voice cracking into a high pitch, shattering the image of the composed politician he had cultivated for years. "You set this all up. The video is fake. That paper's a forgery. I know how this works. Captain, arrest him. He conducted an illegal investigation. Penal Code 214, invasion of privacy." Captain Anderson, standing next to me, rubbed the bridge of his nose. "John Miller," he told him calmly, "calm down." "I'm not going to calm down," my son screamed, foam appearing at the corners of his mouth. "He filmed me with a hidden camera. It is illegally obtained evidence. It has no validity in court. You have no right to arrest me based on a forgery." I looked at him with cold pity. Even now, handcuffed, he was trying to use fragments of legal knowledge to defend himself, but he had still forgotten who he was dealing with. "Privacy, John," I said, approaching the car, "ends where the commission of a crime begins. According to the jurisprudence of the Supreme Court, a video recording made to document illegal acts and defend one's own rights is not an invasion of privacy." I turned to the captain. "Captain Anderson, the trunk compartment of the SUV contains a folder of documents, the contract with Apex Chemical Industries. I believe that is sufficient grounds to open a fraud case, since he sold municipal land pretending it was his." Anderson nodded to one of the officers. The officer opened the door of John's car, leaned into the trunk, and reappeared a second later with a leather folder. "I've got it, Captain." John turned livid. He knew the last card had been played, but then a scream came from the other police car where Jessica was sitting. The door opened, and my daughter-in-law, disheveled, with her mascara running, broke free from the young officer. "Let me go!" she screamed at me. "I did not sign anything. I do not know anything. I am a victim." She ran toward me, falling to her knees, stretching out her expensive clothes. "Robert Miller?" "Dad!" she cried, grabbing the hem of my jacket. "Forgive me. I did not want to. He forced me. He said he would leave me without a dime if I did not cooperate. I just wanted to save my family." I looked at her, a woman who an hour earlier had treated me like an old relic and had planned to burn my house down. She was pathetic and disgusting in her betrayal, but there was a truth in her words. A wife's testimony was the final nail in John's coffin. "Captain," I said, pulling her hands away from my jacket, "the citizen expresses a desire to cooperate with the investigation. I believe she should be granted that opportunity under Article 64 as a mitigating circumstance." Anderson nodded. "Take her away." Jessica was lifted from the ground and taken back to the car. She no longer resisted. She just sobbed and muttered something about a lawyer. John watched this through the glass. His wife had betrayed him as easily as he had betrayed me. The circle was complete. The aftermath. The police convoy departed. The cars, with their lights flashing, rolled slowly down the road. I stayed in the yard, surrounded by a silence that seemed to settle in after all the noise. Near me was only the district attorney's investigator and a few forensic experts packing the gas can into a plastic box. Robert Miller, the investigator, approached me. We need to inspect the house to make sure there are no surprises. Of course, I nodded. Come in. We entered the house. It was quiet and cool inside. I led them to the office. The investigator whistled when he saw my rows of shelves. Serious archives, he commented. A month's worth of work. Take what you need, I said, but I will keep one folder for myself. I went to the desk and picked up the folder, labeled Project Epicenter. This is a copy. I transferred the original to your superiors electronically. And this is for my memory. The investigator nodded in understanding. All right. We will be done here in about 2 hours. Do you have a place to stay? Maybe a hotel? No, I said firmly. This is my house, and I'm staying here. When they moved to the other rooms, I walked over to the window. The lawyer's gold sedan was still parked on the street. He must have fled, abandoning his car when he realized the case was going up in flames. I smiled. Another trophy. I took out my cell phone and called Arthur Davis. Hello, it is over, Arthur, I said. They are arrested. I heard a sigh of relief on the line. Thank God, Robert. Are you okay? I'm fine. I felt the exhaustion settle into my legs like heavy lead. Arthur, I need you to prepare some documents. What documents? For the inheritance? No, for the transfer of the land. What? The notary's voice rose. To whom? To the city, I replied, exactly as the land grant deed mentioned. But with a condition? What condition? The right of occupancy and use of the house for me, and historic status for the property, so that no developer can ever build anything here again. Not a factory, not a pool table. Arthur remained silent. That is genius, Robert. You give them what they could have taken by law anyway. But you dictate your terms. You turn defeat into victory. It is not a victory, Arthur, I said, looking at the empty street where my son had been taken. It is just justice. I hung up. Just then, a tow truck pulled into the yard. The driver stepped out, looking around. Sir, I am here to pick up the car, he called out, pointing to John's SUV. I went to the door. No, I said. Leave the SUV. It is impounded. Take that one. I pointed to the luxury convertible parked in the garage. I remembered Jessica showing it off, a gift from her husband. What is the deal with this one? The driver asked. There is a preventative injunction on it to guarantee a civil suit, I explained. I filed it yesterday, a lawsuit for emotional distress and compensation for medical expenses. Medical expenses? The driver asked, surprised. Yes, the nerves, you know. I smiled slowly. Being old is no joke. The driver nodded and began to secure the car. I watched the red car, the symbol of my daughter-in-law's vanity, being hoisted onto the flatbed. A blue keychain hung from the rearview mirror. It looked pathetically sad. Where to? The driver asked, climbing into the truck. To the municipal impound lot, I replied, and tell them to put it under maximum security in case she tries to get it back. The truck pulled away. The yard was completely silent. I went back into the house and sat in Mary Ellen's armchair. It was too big for me, but now I felt like it was hugging me. I closed my eyes. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to relax. My muscles ached. My head throbbed, but my heart was calm. The terrible pressure that had tormented me since the funeral was gone. I opened my eyes and looked at my wife's portrait on the wall. Well, Mary Ellen Miller, I murmured, we did it. The archives are safe. The house is in order. And our son? Our son got the lesson we could not give him when he was a boy. I knew there would be trials, long and painful procedures. John would choose lawyers. He would appeal. Jessica would cry in press conferences. But that no longer scared me. I was in my element. I was the plaintiff, the witness, and the guardian, and I had work to do. I went to my office. I took a clean sheet of paper and a blue pen this time, and I wrote at the top of the page, File Reorganization Plan. Objective: creation of a legal aid center. If I could not save my son from corruption, I would save others. Those who had no voice, those who were considered disposable. I would give them the weapon that had saved me, the law. 2 months later. 2 months had slipped by. The jacarandas bloomed in the yard, filling the air with a sweet, intoxicating perfume that overpowered even the smell of old paper in my office. But that office was no longer just a repository of the past. A shiny new plaque swung above the door. Municipal Legal Aid Center. Public hours. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. I was sitting at my massive desk, which was now covered not with dusty folders, but with new applications. Sitting beside me was Mrs. Mary Carter, my neighbor, holding a pen in her trembling fingers. Robert, they say the pension recalculation is correct, but I can just see it, she began, her voice shaking. Do not worry, Mary. I confidently took those documents and stamped them. The hard, authoritative sound of the stamp in my office echoed like a promise of protection. They forgot to apply the coefficient for time served in rural areas. Federal statute. We will file a claim today. I saw her shoulders relax. For these people, forgotten by the system, I had become not just a neighbor, but a last resort. Robert of Steel, as they called me now. Life had taken on a new rhythm. John was in preventative detention. The newspapers wrote about the case of the former politician every day, savoring the details of his shady deals and illegal transactions. He was in the county jail, and the news said his lawyers changed every week. No one wanted to be associated with him. Jessica filed for divorce immediately after the first interrogation, trying to save the remains of her assets. My claims for secondary liability froze her accounts. She now lived with her mother in a modest apartment, and rumor had it she had taken a job as a receptionist at a cheap beauty parlor. I did not gloat. I just watched how the law, that impartial machine, crushed those who tried to break it. I drank a cup of tea from my old porcelain mug. The taste was sweet and clean. I felt surprisingly pure. The house belonged to the city, but I was the guardian for life. No one could make me leave again. No one could demolish these walls. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. The folder labeled John's rehabilitation plan was inside. I had started it in a moment of weakness, thinking that perhaps, when he got out in 5 or 7 years, I could help him start over. I looked at the folder, picked it up, and slowly, with satisfaction, fed it into the paper shredder. The paper ripped, turning into thin strips. No, I said to the back of the empty room. Rehabilitation is for those who make mistakes. But betrayal is not a mistake. It is a choice. I was free. Free from the expectations, from the duty of a father to save a grown man, from the fear of the future. My future was here, among these people who needed me. A knock came at the door. Come in, I called. A young mail carrier who always smiled at me stood in the doorway. Robert Miller, certified mail for you from New York. I signed the return receipt. The envelope was thick with the logo of a large law firm, Legal Counsel for Apex Chemical Industries. My heart jumped, but only for a second. I opened the envelope with a letter opener. Inside was a ruling, but not against me or the city. A ruling for a damages claim. Plaintiff, Apex Chemical Industries. Defendant, John Miller. Amount claimed $15 million. I quickly skimmed the text. My lips curled into a smile. They were asking for the return of the advance payment and compensation for lost profits. But the most beautiful part was the justification, because the contract was declared null and void due to the seller's lack of authority, and also due to the discovered fact of forgery pointed out by Robert Miller in his statement. And at the end, in fine print, the contract is considered void because it lacks the signature of witnesses required on the part of the seller for real estate transactions in special risk zones. I laughed a silent laugh, a dry chuckle that echoed off the walls of the office. I remembered the day I found the contract in Mary Ellen's safe. I had noticed that the witness line was empty. John was in such a rush that he had forgotten to ask someone to sign. And in my statement to the prosecutor, I had carefully pointed out, almost by chance, that procedural defect. That defect now cost $15 million. It was the final nail. Even if he got out of prison, he would owe this corporation for the rest of his life. I took a marker and wrote a small capital letter, J, on the envelope. J for justice. Then I opened the filing cabinet and placed the document in the folder between Mary Carter's case and a consumer protection claim. A new life. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of crimson and orange. I turned off the computer. I turned off the lamp. My workday was over, but my work was just beginning. I walked out into the yard, breathing in the warm evening air. Somewhere a dog barked, and I heard children laughing. Life went on, and I was part of it. Not a shadow, not a relic, but a pillar. I adjusted the folder under my arm and smiled. "Well," I said to the silence, "tomorrow is Monday. Public hours. Time to get ready." But the story was not entirely over, because justice does not end with an arrest. Justice is a long, patient, meticulous process. The trials. John's trial began 3 months after his arrest. The courthouse was packed. Curious reporters, victims from other Apex Chemical Industries cases. Everyone wanted to see the corrupt politician fall. I sat in the front row, not as a father, but as the prosecution's star witness. John walked in handcuffed, dressed in the Orange County jail uniform. There was nothing left of the arrogant man who had prematurely celebrated his inheritance. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale. Preventative detention had transformed him into a ghost. Our eyes met for a moment. I expected to see hate, but what I saw was worse. Emptiness, as if something inside him had broken. Jessica sat on the other side of the room, next to her lawyer. She had agreed to testify against John in exchange for a reduced sentence. She wore modest clothes, no jewelry. The woman who had celebrated with champagne in the notary's office looked like a different person. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically. The fake contract, the forged signature, the handwriting analysis, the live stream video, the gas can, the Apex Chemical Industries documents. Every piece of evidence was another brick in the wall surrounding my son. The defense attorney tried to argue that John had been coerced by the investors, that he was as much a victim as I was, but the evidence was overwhelming. When it was my turn to testify, I took the stand calmly. The judge, Judge Mitchell, was a man I had helped many times when he was a young magistrate learning the procedures. "Robert," he greeted me with respect, "please relate the facts to the best of your knowledge." And I related without emotion, without drama, just the facts. The dates, the documents, the clauses, the articles of the code. I spoke for 2 hours, transforming a family betrayal into a clear, compelling legal case. The defense attorney tried to attack my testimony, suggesting that I had personal motives to invent evidence. But every time he tried to sow doubt, I responded with precise legal references, case numbers, and jurisprudential precedents. It was my territory, and he was lost in it. The verdict. 3 weeks later, the verdict arrived. The court finds the defendant, John Miller, guilty of the following crimes. Judge Mitchell read with a firm voice: forgery of public documents, real estate fraud, attempted arson, making threats, and criminal conspiracy for the purpose of ecocide. The sentence is 12 years in prison, with no possibility of parole, permanent disqualification from holding public office, and restitution for damages, in an amount to be determined by the experts. John did not react. He simply lowered his head. Jessica, for her part, received 3 years of probation in exchange for her cooperation. She would have to perform community service and remain under judicial supervision. I walked out of the courthouse under a bright sun. Reporters surrounded me. Robert, how do you feel seeing your son convicted? Were you too hard on him? Will you ever forgive him? I raised my hand, asking for silence. The law does not know fathers and sons, I said calmly. It only knows facts and evidence. My son committed serious crimes that threatened not just my well-being, but the entire community. The sentence is just. And forgiveness? A reporter insisted. Forgiveness, I said thoughtfully, is a personal thing that everyone must find in their own time. But justice does not wait for forgiveness. Justice acts when it must act. I pushed my way through the crowd and walked to my car. The old sedan Mary Ellen and I had bought 20 years ago still ran perfectly. As I drove back home, I thought about the judge's words. 12 years. John would be almost 60 when he got out. What kind of man would he be then? I did not know. And honestly, it was no longer my responsibility to know. The center flourishes. Months passed. The Municipal Legal Aid Center became a refuge for those forgotten by the system. Seniors with slashed pensions, workers unfairly fired, families facing illegal evictions. I hired 2 young, recently graduated lawyers, Danielle and Patty. They were brilliant, passionate, and they shared my vision that the law should serve everyone, not just the powerful. We trained law students as interns. I taught them the same things I had learned in my 40 years. Meticulousness is power. Patience is strategy. And the law, properly applied, is the most powerful weapon that exists. One day, while I was reviewing cases, Danielle came into my office with a serious expression. Robert, you have a visitor. Who is it? She says her name is Lucy, the one who gave you the USB drive. I sat up straight in my chair. Send her in. Lucy walked in timidly. She looked different. She was no longer the scared, abused assistant. She wore professional clothes. Her hair was neatly styled. Her shoulders held high. Robert, she said with a nervous smile, I came to thank you. Thank me? I should be thanking you. Your evidence was crucial, not just for that. She sat down when I motioned for her to do so. After the trial, I used my savings to enroll in college. I'm studying law. I want to be like you, someone who helps those who have no voice. I felt something warm in my chest. Pride, perhaps, or hope. That is wonderful, Lucy. And what brings you by today? I wanted to ask you if, when I finish my degree, if I could work here, at the center, not for money, but to learn. I smiled. When you finish your degree, Lucy, you will have a place here. I promise you. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Robert. You changed my life. You taught me not to stay quiet in the face of injustice. After she left, I stood looking out the window. The yard was full of flowers, the jacarandas, the geraniums, the bougainvilleas that Mary Ellen had planted years ago were blooming with renewed strength. It was as if the house knew that it was now fulfilling its true purpose. A letter from prison. 6 months after the verdict, I received a letter. The envelope bore the seal of the Federal Correctional Center. I opened it with trembling hands. Father, I know I have no right to call you that after what I did. I know I do not deserve your attention or your time, but I needed to write this to you, if only to get it off my chest. Here in this cell, I've had a lot of time to think, to remember, to face what I became. You were right about everything. I let myself be consumed by ambition, by power, by money. I forgot the values you and Mom tried to teach me. I betrayed them. I betrayed you, and I betrayed myself. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I do not deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that I finally understand. I understand why you did what you did. It was not cruelty. It was the only way to stop me before I hurt more people. You saved me, Dad. Even if it does not look like it, you saved me from becoming a worse monster than I already was. I do not expect an answer. I just needed to tell you this. John, I folded the letter slowly and put it away in my desk drawer. I did not reply. Not yet. Maybe someday, maybe never. Forgiveness, if it came, would arrive in its own time. The legacy. A year after the arrest, the City Council officially inaugurated the Mary Ellen Miller Ecological Park on the land that had been our property. They invited me as a guest of honor. The mayor gave a speech about the importance of protecting the environment and honoring those who fight for justice. He mentioned Mary Ellen and her vision, and he mentioned me as the guardian of that vision. When it was my turn to speak, I walked up to the podium and looked at the crowd. Families, children playing, couples walking. The space that John had wanted to turn into a toxic dump was now a green lung for the community. Mary Ellen Miller, I began, my wife used to say that true wealth is not in what you accumulate, but in what you leave behind. Not in the buildings you construct for yourself, but in the spaces you open up for others. This park is her legacy, and it is also a reminder that no man, no matter how powerful he believes himself to be, is above the law that protects the common good. May this place be a refuge for everyone. May our children play here without fear. May the water that flows beneath this earth remain pure. And may we always remember that justice, although sometimes painful, is the only path toward a truly just society. The applause was long and warm. After the ceremony, I walked alone through the park. I found a bench under a weeping willow tree and sat down. I took a small photo out of my wallet. Mary Ellen and I on our wedding day. Young, full of hope, not imagining everything that was to come. We did it, my love, I whispered. Not the way we had planned, but we did it. A soft breeze shook the leaves of the willow, and for a moment I could almost hear her laugh. 5 years later. 5 years passed like pages of a book being turned slowly. The Municipal Legal Aid Center was no longer just my dream. It had become an institution recognized throughout the entire state. We had 6 full-time lawyers, 20 interns rotating every semester, and we had won over 200 cases against corporations, corrupt officials, and abusive landlords. I was already 75 years old. My hair was completely white now, and my hands trembled a little when holding a pen, but my mind remained sharp as a razor, able to recall every article, every precedent, every strategy I had learned in my long career. A November afternoon, I was reviewing a file when Patty ran in. "Robert, there is someone at the entrance asking for you." "Who is it?" She hesitated. "He says he is your son." The file dropped from my hands. John. It had been 5 years since the verdict. He had served just under half of his sentence, and from what I had been informed, he had been granted early release for good behavior. "Should I send him in?" Patty asked softly. I took a deep breath. "Yes, but stay close." John walked in slowly. I almost did not recognize him. The arrogant, well-dressed man was gone. In his place was a thin, stooped man with deep wrinkles around his eyes. He wore simple clothes, jeans and a cotton shirt, but the most striking thing was his eyes. They were no longer empty like at the trial. Now there was something in them. Shame, perhaps. Humility. "Dad," he said, his voice hoarse, as if he had not used it in a long time. "John," I replied neutrally, "sit down." He sat on the edge of the chair, his hands in his lap, like a child called into the principal's office. Silence stretched between us like an abyss. "Did you get my letter?" he finally asked. "Yes." "Why did you never reply?" "Because I had nothing to say," I answered honestly. "Not yet." He nodded, accepting that. "I understand. I just came to tell you that I am out, that I got a job at a hardware store. It is humble, but it is honest work. I'm glad for you. And," his voice cracked a little, "I came to tell you that I'm sorry. I know those words mean nothing. After what I did, I know I destroyed everything. But I needed to tell you in person. I am sorry, Dad. For everything." I looked at this man who had been my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the one I had taught to ride a bike, the one I had been so proud of when he was elected to the city council. Where had he gotten lost? At what moment had ambition devoured the man he could have been? John, I said finally, there is something you need to understand. I did not stop you because I hated you. I stopped you because I loved you too much to let you destroy yourself completely. His eyes filled with tears. If I had given you the house, if I had closed my eyes to your crimes, you would have kept falling. You would have poisoned entire families. You would have ruined lives. And eventually you would have ended up dead at the hands of those investors you feared so much. I know, he whispered. In prison, I had a lot of time to think about it. I had a lot of time to understand that you were not my enemy. You were the only one who had the courage to stop me. And now what? I asked. What will you do with this second chance? Live honestly, he said firmly. Work. Pay my debts, even if it takes me the rest of my life. And maybe, he hesitated, maybe someday I will deserve to have you look at me as your son again. I remained silent for a long moment. Forgiveness, John, is not something that is deserved. It is something that is granted. And honestly, I do not know if I can give it to you yet. But I stood up and walked toward the window. I can give you something else. What? A chance to redeem yourself. Not with me. With the community you betrayed. I turned to face him. We need volunteers at the center. People to help with filing, basic research, translating legal documents into plain language for the people we serve. I cannot pay you, and you will have to earn the trust of every person here. But if you really want to change, this is a place to start. John looked at me in astonishment. Are you offering me a job here? As a volunteer, under supervision. And if at any moment I see you falling back into your old habits, you are gone immediately. Understood? Yes, Dad, I understand. He stood up, and for a moment I thought he would try to hug me. But he stopped, respecting the distance that still existed between us. Thank you, he said simply. I will not let you down. I hope so, son. I hope so. The circle closes. 2 more years passed. John worked at the center every day, quiet, diligent, humble. He never complained. He never asked for recognition. He just worked. And slowly, very slowly, he began to earn the respect of the people he had once despised. Lucy graduated from law school with honors and joined the center as a full-time lawyer. She and John developed a professional working relationship. Never exactly friends, but colleagues who respected each other. Jessica, for her part, had vanished. I heard rumors that she had moved to Florida and started over under a different name. I did not look for her. Some chapters are better left closed. One evening, as the sun was setting over the yard, John and I were sitting on the porch. It was one of the few times we had been alone since his release. Dad, he said suddenly, will you ever be able to forgive me? I thought carefully before answering. I already have, John, I said finally. I do not know exactly when it happened. Maybe it was gradual, watching how you worked, seeing how you changed. Or maybe it was when I realized that holding on to resentment was only hurting me. But forgiving you does not mean forgetting what happened. It does not mean everything goes back to the way it was. It means I choose not to let it consume me. I understand, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And John, I added, there is something else you need to know. Your mother forgave you before she died. That is why she left that video. Not to destroy you, but to save you. She knew that if you were not stopped, you would end up destroying yourself. Tears streamed down his face. I never deserved either of you. Maybe not, I said honestly, but that is the nature of a parent's love. It is not about what you deserve. It is about never giving up hope that you will find your way back. We sat in silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in gold and purple. The end of an era. I am 78 years old now. My health is failing. The doctors talk about my heart with serious expressions. I know I do not have much time left. But I am not afraid. I have lived a full life. I have fought for justice. I have helped hundreds of people. I have seen my son fall and rise again, and I have learned the most important lesson of all. Justice without mercy is cruelty, but mercy without justice is complicity. I have appointed Lucy as the new director of the center for when I am gone. She is brilliant, passionate, and her heart is in the right place. The center will be in good hands. John will continue working here as well, not as my son, but as just another member of the team, earning his place every day. This morning, while I was organizing my personal documents, I found the old letter John had sent me from prison. I read it again, and this time I decided to reply. John, years have passed since you wrote this letter. A lot has changed. You have changed. I want you to know that I am proud of you. Not of the man you were, but of the man you are choosing to be every day. The path of redemption is long and difficult, but you are walking it with dignity and humility. That is all any father can ask for. Your mother would be proud, too. With love, your father, Robert. I sealed the letter and left it on my desk, where he would find it. Epilogue. Robert Miller passed away peacefully 3 years after these events, at the age of 81, in his home, surrounded by the archives he loved so much. The Municipal Legal Aid Center now bears his name, the Robert Miller Legal Aid Center. John worked there until the day he died, 25 years later, having dedicated the rest of his life to helping the people he had once despised. Lucy became a renowned human rights lawyer, winning major cases against multinational corporations, and the Mary Ellen Miller Ecological Park remains a green oasis in the heart of the city, reminding everyone that true wealth is not in what you accumulate, but in what you leave behind.